long before silver bullets and full moons, before Hollywood gave us tortured souls howling at the night sky, before the medieval hunters who burned suspected shapeshifters at the stake, there was a king. His name was Lycaon, and in the shadow of a sacred mountain in ancient Arcadia, he committed an act so monstrous, so utterly beyond the pale of human decency, that the gods themselves recoiled. What happened next would echo through millennia. It would birth 1,000 legends, inspire countless nightmares, and plant the seed of every werewolf story ever told. But here is what most people miss about the tale of Lycaon. He was not transformed into a wolf as punishment for his sins. No, the transformation simply revealed what he had always been. The beast was never created, it was merely unmasked. To understand Lycaon, we must first understand the world he inhabited. This was the age of heroes and monsters, when the gods still walked among mortals in disguise, testing humanity's virtue, punishing its wickedness. Arcadia lay nestled in the heart of the Peloponnese, a land of rugged mountains and dark forests, where wolves howled in the valleys and shepherds whispered prayers to Pan. It was wild country, untamed, the kind of place where civilization felt like a thin veneer stretched over something far more primal. And ruling over this ancient kingdom was Lycaon, son of Pelasgus, founder of cities, father of 50 sons. By all outward appearances, he was a king of considerable accomplishment. He had established the city of Lycosura, said by some to be the oldest city in all of Greece. He had instituted the worship of Zeus Lycaeus on the slopes of Mount Lycaon, where the sky seemed to press down upon the earth and storms gathered without warning. He had brought order to a wild land. Or so it seemed. But power does strange things to men, and Lycaon had held power for a very long time. Perhaps too long. Some say it began with doubt. The gods demanded worship, demanded sacrifice, demanded belief, but what proof did mortals truly have of their divinity? Lycaon had seen many things in his long reign. He had seen priests claim divine authority. He had seen oracles speak in riddles that could mean anything. He had heard travelers tell of gods walking among men, but he had never witnessed it himself. And doubt, once it takes root in a skeptical heart, spreads like rot through timber. Why should he, a king, bow to beings he had never seen? Why should he offer his finest cattle, his most precious wine, to entities that might be nothing more than stories told to keep common people obedient? The question gnawed at him. It whispered in the quiet hours when sleep would not come. And slowly, imperceptibly, it transformed from doubt into something darker. A desire to know, to test, to prove, one way or another, whether the gods were truly gods at all. The opportunity came on a night when storm clouds gathered over Mount Lycaon, like a bruise spreading across the sky. A stranger arrived at the palace gates. He was tall, powerfully built, with eyes that seemed to flash with hidden lightning. He carried himself like a man accustomed to authority, though his robes were those of a simple traveler. He asked for hospitality, as any traveler might, and Lycaon, bound by the sacred laws of Xenia that commanded all Greeks to welcome strangers, had no choice but to admit him. But as servants prepared the guest chamber, as wine was poured and bread was broken, Lycaon studied the stranger with calculating eyes. There was something about this man, something that stirred the hairs on the back of his neck, a presence too large for mortal form to contain. Could this be what the stories spoke of? A god in disguise? And if it was, here, at last, was a chance to put the divine to the test. What Lycaon did next has been recounted in different ways by different tellers across the centuries. According to Ovid, the Roman poet who would later immortalize this tale in his Metamorphoses, the king devised a test of terrible simplicity. If this stranger was truly a god, surely he would know the nature of the food placed before him. Surely divine senses could not be deceived as mortal ones might. And if he was not a god, if he was merely a man with an impressive bearing, then he would eat what was served without suspicion, and Lycaon would have his answer. Either way, the king would know. Some versions say Lycaon took a hostage from the Molossians, a prisoner of war whose life meant nothing to him. Others claim he seized one of his own grandsons, the child Arcas, son of Zeus himself by the nymph Callisto, though Lycaon did not know this. Still others suggest it was a local boy, nameless and unmourned, chosen for no reason other than his availability. The details shift and change across the centuries, but the core of the act remains constant and horrifying. Lycaon killed an innocent. He butchered the body, and he served the flesh to his guest. Imagine the scene. The great hall of the Arcadian palace, lit by guttering torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. The long table laden with food and drink, servants moving silently in the background. The stranger seated at the place of honor, his eyes unreadable. And Lycaon watching, waiting. The platter was set before the guest with all ceremony. Meat, roasted and seasoned, steaming gently in the cool mountain air. To all appearances, it was simply another course in a generous feast. But beneath the king's calm exterior, anticipation coiled like a serpent. What would happen? Would the stranger eat without hesitation, proving himself merely mortal? Would he hesitate, sensing something wrong? Or would something else occur entirely, something that would shatter Lycaon's understanding of the world? The stranger reached for the meat. Lycaon held his breath. And then, in an instant that stretched into eternity, everything changed. The guest rose from his seat, and as he rose, his form began to shift. Light blazed from within, so brilliant that servants cried out and shielded their eyes. The simple traveler's robes dissolved into radiance, revealing the terrible majesty of the king of Olympus himself. Zeus, father of gods and men, lord of thunder and lightning, master of the sky. And he was furious beyond mortal comprehension. The very air crackled with divine wrath. Storm clouds boiled through the windows, turning day to darkness. Thunder shook the foundations of the palace until stones cracked and dust rained from the ceiling. Lightning arced between the pillars, leaving the stench of ozone and scorched marble. The servants fled screaming, but Lycaon could not move. He stood transfixed, frozen by the terrible recognition of what he had done. Not merely served human flesh to a stranger, but served it to the most powerful being in existence, the god who held dominion over guest right and hospitality, the protector of travelers and suppliants, the very deity whose sacred laws Lycaon had just violated in the most abominable way imaginable. Zeus spoke, and his voice was the rumbling of distant thunder, the howling of the storm, the judgment of heaven itself rendered into sound. He spoke of outrage. He spoke of sacrilege. He spoke of the fundamental corruption that had taken root in Lycaon's heart, the rot that no crown or kingdom could conceal. The king tried to flee. He ran from the hall, through corridors suddenly unfamiliar, out into the storm-lashed night. But there was no escaping the wrath of a god. As he ran, Lycaon felt his body begin to change. His screams caught in his throat and emerged as howls. His hands struck the ground, but they were no longer hands. They were paws, gray-furred and clawed. His fine royal garments tore and fell away as his body twisted, as his face stretched forward into a snout, as his teeth lengthened into fangs. He tried to call for help, to command his servants, to assert his royal authority, but only a wolf's cry emerged. Desperate, horrified, he fled into the wilderness that surrounded his palace. And somewhere in those dark Arcadian forests, the king who had tested the gods, vanished forever. In his place ran a wolf, gray as ash, wild-eyed and maddened, still wearing scraps of fine clothing caught in its fur. Still, according to Ovid, retaining some trace of what it had been: the same gray hair, the same fierce eyes, the same savage nature that had always lurked beneath the mask of civilization. But Zeus's fury did not end with Lycaon alone. The king's 50 sons, those princes of Arcadia who had aided their father in his blasphemy, who had helped prepare and serve the unspeakable meal, were not spared. One by one, bolts of lightning found them. Some were struck down where they stood. Others fled, only to be found later, charred corpses marking the paths of their futile escape. The dynasty of Lycaon was shattered in a single night of divine vengeance. Only one was spared. Nyctimus, the youngest son, was either not present during the feast or was the actual victim whose flesh was served. The accounts differ. Either way, Zeus restored him to life, perhaps recognizing that someone must remain to continue the human story in Arcadia. But the land would never be the same. The palace stood as a scorched ruin, a testament to what happens when mortals forget their place. And in the forests, a wolf that had once been king ran wild, forever caught between the man he had been and the beast he had become. Now, here is where most retellings stop. The crime, the punishment, the transformation. It seems like a complete story. King challenges God, king becomes wolf, lesson learned. But if we stop there, we miss the deeper current running beneath this myth. We miss what the ancient Greeks were truly trying to say. Because this was never simply a story about punishment for impiety. It was a meditation on something far more troubling: the beast that lives inside us all. Consider how Ovid describes the transformation. Lycaon's clothing fell away, but his essential nature remained unchanged. The gray hair persisted. The fierce eyes stayed the same. The violence that had led him to murder and cannibalism, it was still there, simply given a more appropriate form. The wolf was not created by Zeus's curse. The wolf was revealed. Lycaon had always been this creature. The crown and the palace and the trappings of civilization were merely disguise. What makes this truly unsettling is that the Greeks were not telling a story about one uniquely evil king. They were telling a story about humanity itself, about the thin line that separates us from animals, about how easily that line can be crossed. Mount Lycaon, where Lycaon had established his worship of Zeus, became a place of dark legend. For centuries after his transformation, a strange ritual was performed there during the festival called Lycaea. According to Pausanias, the Greek traveler who documented such practices, worshippers would gather in a sacred precinct where no shadow ever fell. Not the shadow of man or beast or even bird in flight. There, it was whispered, human sacrifice was still performed. A young boy would be killed, his entrails mixed with those of animal victims. And whoever ate the human flesh would be transformed into a wolf, doomed to wander the wilderness for 9 years. If, during those 9 years, they abstained from human flesh, they would regain their human form. But if they tasted it even once, they remained wolves forever. Whether these rituals actually occurred, or whether Pausanias was recording wild rumors, we cannot say with certainty. The Greeks themselves were sometimes unclear on the matter, but the very existence of such stories tells us something important. The myth of Lycaon was not dead history. It was a living fear, a present danger, a warning that the boundary between human and animal was permeable and always at risk. This brings us to the werewolf itself, the creature that would haunt human imagination for thousands of years after Lycaon ran howling into the Arcadian night. The word itself comes from Old English, war meaning man and wolf meaning wolf. But the concept is ancient beyond measure. In Greek, the term was lycanthropos, literally wolf-man, from which we derive the medical term lycanthropy, the delusion that one has transformed into a wolf. But what the Greeks understood, and what later cultures sometimes forgot, was that the werewolf was not primarily an external threat. It was an internal one. The wolf was not something that attacked from outside. It was something that emerged from within. When medieval Europeans told tales of werewolves, they often framed them as demonic possession or witchcraft, external forces corrupting innocent victims. But the Greek version was more disturbing. Lycaon was not possessed. He was not bewitched. He was simply revealed. The violence was always his. The savagery was always there. The transformation merely stripped away the pretense. Consider how this connects to broader Greek thought about human nature. The philosophers would later debate whether humans were fundamentally good or evil, whether civilization elevated us or merely constrained us. But the myth-makers had already weighed in. In the story of Lycaon, they suggested that beneath the king's crown lurked a wolf's hunger. Beneath the statesman's rhetoric crouched animal cunning. Beneath the veneer of law and custom and civilization itself prowled something older and darker. The Arcadians, who lived closest to this myth, were themselves considered by other Greeks to be somewhat primitive. They were shepherds and hunters dwelling in a wild land, still close to the forests their ancestors had tamed. Other Greeks sometimes called them acorn eaters, suggesting they lived like the original humans before Demeter taught mankind to farm. In this context, Lycaon's story takes on additional resonance. Even the founder of their civilization, even their greatest king, was ultimately revealed as barely human. What hope, then, for the rest of us? But perhaps this is too harsh a reading. Perhaps there is another way to understand Lycaon's fate, one that does not merely condemn, but also warns. Because the Greeks were not naive. They knew that kings could be tyrants. They knew that power corrupted. They knew that those who hold absolute authority over others can begin to see those others as less than human, as objects to be used, as means to ends, as meat. Lycaon's crime was not simply impiety or violation of guest right, as terrible as those things were. His crime was treating a human being as less than human. He saw a person and thought only of flesh. He looked at a child and saw only an opportunity to satisfy his own curiosity. In modern terms, we might call this a failure of empathy, a collapse of the moral imagination, the inability to recognize the humanity in another. And this, the Greeks suggest, is what truly transforms us into beasts. Not magic, not curses, not the light of the full moon. Simply the refusal to see others as we see ourselves. The figure of Lycaon casts a long shadow through the centuries that followed. Every culture that encountered wolves, which is to say, every culture in the temperate regions of the Northern Hemisphere, developed its own version of the werewolf myth. The Norse had their Ulfhednar, the wolf warriors who fought in a battle rage so intense they were said to become wolves themselves. The Slavic peoples had their Volkolak, cursed individuals who transformed under the moon's influence. The Celtic tribes had tales of shapeshifters who could take wolf form through magic or birthright. And underlying all of these, threading through like a silver wire, was that original Greek insight, that the wolf is not other. The wolf is us. The beast is always already within, waiting for the moment when civilization slips, when the mask falls, when hunger or fear or rage strips away everything we pretend to be and reveals what we truly are. Modern psychology has found this insight uncomfortably accurate. Clinical lycanthropy, the genuine belief that one has transformed into a wolf or other animal, is recognized as a rare but real psychiatric condition. Those who experience it describe the sensation as terrifying and all-consuming, the feeling that their body is changing, that their mind is being submerged, that something else is taking over. But even beyond this clinical extreme, psychologists recognize the wolf within in more metaphorical terms. The shadow self that Carl Jung described, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. The id that Freud identified, the primitive drives that civilization teaches us to suppress. The research on human behavior in extreme situations, war, famine, disaster, that reveals how quickly the veneer of civilization can crack. The Greeks did not have our terminology, but they understood. They understood that humans are capable of terrible things. They understood that the difference between a king and a beast might be nothing more than opportunity and consequence. And they gave us Lycaon as a reminder, as a warning, as a dark mirror in which to see the parts of ourselves we would rather forget. There is one more thread to follow before we leave the forests of Arcadia. The story of Lycaon does not exist in isolation. It connects to a vast web of Greek myth, touching some of the most famous stories in the entire tradition. Consider Callisto, the nymph who caught Zeus's eye and bore him a son named Arcas. This was the same Arcas who, in some versions, was the child Lycaon served to Zeus. Callisto would be transformed into a bear by a jealous Hera, and Arcas, grown to manhood, would nearly kill her while hunting, not knowing his own mother in her animal form. Only Zeus's intervention, placing them both among the stars as Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, prevented the tragedy. Here again, we find transformation, hunting, and the blurred line between human and animal. The constellation itself, wheeling eternally around the pole star, serves as a nightly reminder of these old stories. Consider, too, the broader question of divine justice that the Lycaon myth raises. Zeus punished the king for his impiety and his cannibalism. This seems straightforward enough. But Zeus himself was hardly a model of ethical behavior. This was the god who seduced and abandoned countless mortal women, who imprisoned the Titans in Tartarus, who swallowed his first wife Metis whole because of a prophecy, who allowed his brother Poseidon to terrorize the seas and his brother Hades to abduct Persephone. The Greeks were not blind to this irony. They told stories of divine hypocrisy precisely because they recognized it. But they also understood something that we, in our more egalitarian age, sometimes forget. The gods did not rule because they were good, they ruled because they were powerful. And power in the ancient world made its own rules. Lycaon's true crime was not that he acted immorally. His true crime was that he challenged power itself. He dared to test the god who tested others. He tried to reverse the relationship between mortal and divine, and for that presumption, he paid the ultimate price. In the end, what are we to make of this ancient tale? A story of a king who became a wolf, the first werewolf, the ancestor of 1,000 nightmares? Perhaps we should see it as the Greeks saw it, not merely as entertainment but as instruction. A lesson encoded in narrative. A truth too dangerous to speak directly, so wrapped instead in the clothing of myth. The lesson is this: we are not as civilized as we believe. The wolf waits inside us, patient and eternal. Every time we treat another person as less than human, every time we let hunger or anger or curiosity override compassion, every time we convince ourselves that our power gives us rights over others, we take one step closer to the forest, one step closer to running on 4 legs through the Arcadian night, one step closer to forgetting we were ever anything else. And perhaps there is one more lesson, subtler and more hopeful, because Lycaon's transformation was, in the end, a kind of truth-telling. The wolf form revealed what the human form had hidden. The curse stripped away the lies. In a world of masks and pretense, of kings who kill while claiming to protect, of civilization that enslaves while promising freedom. Perhaps there is value in such brutal honesty. Perhaps the true horror is not the wolf, but the king who hides a wolf's heart. Perhaps the transformation itself is not the tragedy, but merely its recognition. The full moon rises over the mountains of Arcadia still. The wolves still howl in the forests, though their numbers are fewer now, their territory shrinking before the advance of human settlement. But the story endures. It has endured for nearly 3,000 years, passed from Greek to Roman to medieval to modern, changing shape like its protagonist, but never losing its essential nature. Because we still need it. We still need the reminder of what we might become. The next time you see a wolf in film or fiction, the next time you encounter the werewolf in its modern incarnations, the tortured soul in horror movies, the romantic anti-hero in paranormal romance, the metaphor for transformation in young adult fiction, remember Lycaon. Remember the king who served human flesh to the king of gods. Remember the palace struck by lightning, the princes scattered and slain, the crown that fell away to reveal pointed ears and hungry eyes. Remember that before there was silver, before there was the full moon, before there was the curse, there was simply a man who forgot what it meant to be human. And the gods, in their terrible wisdom, showed him the truth. Some transformations are not curses at all. They are revelations. They are mirrors. They are the stripping away of everything we use to hide from ourselves. And in the howl of the wolf echoing through the ancient night, if we listen closely, we might hear an older, darker sound. The sound of our own hearts. The sound of the beast within. The sound of everything we fear to find when we look too deeply into our own eyes. The Greeks heard it 3,000 years ago in the shadow of Mount Lycaon. And now, perhaps, so do you.